Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise and deliver the most essential insights from a stack of sources, all custom-tailored for you.
And today, we're plunging into a topic that might just, fundamentally shift your understanding of environmental history.
Yeah, imagine for a moment a sprawling city, not in the distant past, but right now, cloaked in a thick, choking haze, a gray, acrid cloud that stings your eyes, rasps in your throat, makes every breath feel like an effort.
You can barely see the person next to you.
Exactly. Now, most of us probably immediately picture what? Victorian London, or maybe a 20th century industrial hub.
Right. The belching factories, the endless traffic jams, modern pollution at its peak.
But what if I told you that this isn't just a modern problem, not just a byproduct of the last couple of centuries of tech advancement?
What if this deep dive takes us way back?
Way back. Not even the Industrial Revolution, but centuries before it. We're talking London, between, say, 1250 and 1650.
That's right. Medieval and early modern air pollution. And the surprising, sometimes kind of tragic, fuel crises that sparked it.
There's this common misconception out there, isn't there? This idea that environmental issues are solely the bitter fruits of modern industrialization.
Yeah, and it kind of implies a simple fix. Get rid of the industries, find new green tech, and bam, problem solved.
But as we're going to discover today, the truth is, it's far more complex, more ancient, and frankly, a bit more unsettling.
So our mission today...
Our mission is to unpack how London's early air pollution wasn't just like a nuisance. It was a stark symptom of a much deeper, more fundamental environmental problem.
Which was?
The exhaustion of a society's preferred, sustainable fuel source wood, and the desperate struggle to find an adequate, often much dirtier substitute.
And we're going to connect this pollution to some really surprising demographic and economic shifts that basically reshaped England.
Right. And our main source for this deep dive.
We're drawing heavily from an academic article published back in 1975, actually, by William H. Tebrake. It's called Air Pollution and Fuel Crises in Pre-Industrial London, 1250-1650. And it appeared in Technology and Culture.
And it provides a really fascinating historical lens, doesn't it?
It really does. What's truly groundbreaking about this research, I think, isn't just that it's an interesting historical footnote. It's a profound reframe.
How so?
It pushes us to challenge our assumptions about environmental decline. It forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth. Our modern environmental crisis isn't really a modern invention.
So these fundamental struggles, waste disposal, food supply, water quality.
Exactly, and fuel availability. At their core, they're as ancient as civilization itself. We've just amplified them, to an unprecedented global scale today.
So this isn't just history, it's kind of a mirror.
It is, reflecting our deepest, oldest challenges.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's rewind. Not all the way back just yet, but maybe start in the mid-17th century. London was already deep in a serious air pollution problem then.
Centuries before the steam engine really dominated.
And we have these really vivid accounts from the time that bring it to life. Take John Evelyn, the famous diarist, writer, big name of the Royal Society.
Right, he wrote that powerful piece in 1661, Fumifugium.
Fumifugium, yeah, or The Inconveniency of the Air and Smoke of London Dissipated. Rolls right off the tongue.
Catchy title.
He described walking in Whitehall Palace one day, and this presumptuous smoke, as he called it, invaded the actual court. It got so thick that men could hardly discern one another for the cloud.
Wow. In the palace itself?
Yeah. He said none could support without manifest inconveniency. Can you even imagine? Even the king couldn't escape it. No amount of royal privilege helped.
It gives you a really direct, visceral sense of the pollution, doesn't it? Not just some abstract problem.
Totally. And Evelyn didn't just describe the scene. He had a pretty strong diagnosis of the source and its effects.
Oh, absolutely. He pointed the finger squarely at that hellish and dismal cloud of sea coal. He called it an impure and thick mist accompanied with a fuliginous and filthy vapor.
Doesn't sound pleasant.
Not at all. And his descriptions of the health impacts were grim. He claimed it was corrupting the lungs and disordering the entire habit of their bodies.
Leading to what exactly?
Leading to cathars, physics, coughs, and consumptions that rage more in this one city than in the whole earth besides.
So basically everything from bad colds to TB. And he blamed London's air.
Directly. He saw it as a major public health crisis unfolding, not just an inconvenience, a killer.
And it wasn't just Evelyn, this passionate advocate, ringing the alarm bells.
No, just 4 years later, 1665, another Royal Society fellow, John Grant.
Ah, the pioneer of demography.
The very same. He added this chilling statistical layer. Looking at mortality records, he found a significantly higher death rate in London. About 1 in 32 died annually there.
Compared to
The countryside, where it was roughly 1 in 50. And this was even excluding the deaths from the Great Plague, which was raging then.
Wow. So what did he blame?
He put it down to two main things: London being overcrowded, and crucially, the universally used sea coal.
And he had a comparison point.
He did. He made this powerful observation. Before 1600, when sea coal use wasn't quite so dominant, London's death rate was actually no higher than the countryside's.
That's pretty damning evidence. A direct correlation backed by numbers.
It really speaks volumes about the impact of this specific fuel.
So let's talk about this sea coal. What exactly was it?
Okay, so our source describes it as a very soft, sulfurous, low-grade coal. Basically, the stuff mined near the coast, mostly up in Northumberland and Durham.
And shipped by sea, hence the name.
Exactly. Easy to get to London by boat, but when you burned it, well, it produced a continual cloud of choking, foul-smelling smoke. And it left behind a heavy deposit of thick black soot. But it was worse than just visible grime.
How so?
The sulfur. It had a really high sulfur content. Burning it released sulfur oxides, specifically sulfur trioxide, SO3.
And that does what in the air?
It reacts very readily with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid, basically an acid mist.
Which would explain the irritated eyes and breathing problems Evelyn described.
Precisely. It perfectly explains the corrupting the lungs idea and the prevalence of respiratory diseases.
And this was different from traditional fuels.
Oh, completely different. Firewood and charcoal, the preferred stuff, they produce some smoke, sure, but relatively small quantities of smoke and fumes. And crucially, they lacked those corrosive sulfur compounds.
So the shift to sea coal must have made a huge, noticeable difference in air quality.
Dramatic, you'd have to assume.
Okay, so by the mid-17th century, sea coal is clearly a recognized public health hazard, a major environmental issue. But the really surprising thing is how far back this goes.
Yeah, this wasn't just a 17th century problem popping up out of nowhere.
No, the smoke from sea coal was causing trouble way earlier, as early as the 13th century.
There's that amazing anecdote from 1257.
Queen Eleanor, Henry III's wife, reportedly driven from Nottingham Castle by sea coal smoke during a feast.
She just couldn't stand it. Even royalty couldn't escape the medieval smog.
It shows it was already noticeable, even problematic back then.
And a key insight from Tebrick's research is that even back in the 13th century, long before we think of major industrial pollution, London was grappling with significant localized air quality issues.
Like what?
Well, think about the royal commissions set up in 1285 and 1288. They were investigating public complaints about lime kilns.
Used for making mortar for building.
Right, big ovens. Traditionally, they'd burn wood or charcoal, but increasingly they were using sea coal.
And the result?
The result, according to the investigations, was that the air was infected and corrupted. It was seen as a danger to the peril of those frequenting and dwelling in those parts.
So not just a bad smell, a recognized health risk.
Mm.
Peril. That's strong language.
Very strong, especially considering the understanding of public health back then.
And it wasn't just these big lime kilns either.
No, in 1298, we have this even more striking example. A group of London smiths, blacksmiths, metalworkers.
What did they do?
They voluntarily decided they wouldn't work at night. And their reason: because of the unhealthiness of sea coal and damage to their neighbors caused by their nighttime forges.
Wow. Voluntary self-regulation because of pollution in 1298.
Exactly. 6 centuries before the EPA, it tells you the impact must have been very real, very immediate, affecting daily life and health right there on the ground.
So these complaints, starting with citizens, then tradespeople, they eventually reached the top.
They did. In 1307, King Edward VIII, known for being quite an administrator, issued a royal proclamation.
What did it say?
It explicitly prohibited using sea coal in kilns. He'd gotten complaints from prelates and magnates, high-ranking clergy, nobles visiting London, plus the city's own citizens.
And their complaint was
that using sea coal instead of traditional fuels created an intolerable smell that diffuses itself throughout the neighboring places, and the air is greatly infected, to the annoyance of the magnates, citizens, and others there dwelling, and to the injury of their bodily health.
Again, injury of their bodily health. Very direct.
Remarkably direct for the time. And just 2 weeks later, another royal commission was set up to punish offenders by grievous ransoms.
So it had teeth. This wasn't just a suggestion.
No, it shows how seriously this early pre-industrial pollution was treated, even by the crown.
Okay, so from Queen Eleanor choking to royal decrees, Smiths regulating themselves.
Yeah.
It was pretty clear. Sea coal was a known nuisance, a health concern back in the late 13th, early 14th centuries.
Undeniably.
You'd think that would be the start of a nonstop battle against this smog, right?
Logically, yes.
But here's the really baffling part. The twist that initially stumped researchers. For the next 2 centuries or so, those complaints, those official records.
They mostly vanish.
Right. What on earth happened? This is the mystery of the missing smoke.
It's fascinating, isn't it? You've got this clear evidence of a serious problem, royal intervention, the works, late 13th, early 14th century.
And then, quiet. For a long time, from the late 14th century, basically up to the mid-16th century.
Yeah, apart from one isolated complaint about plumbers in 1371, it's really hard to find detailed accounts of air pollution problems until much later in the 16th century.
When it comes back with a vengeance.
Exactly. So this apparent lull is a real historical puzzle.
Your first thought might be, well, maybe the records are just patchy for that period. Scribes weren't writing it down.
That's possible. And we do know sea coal imports continued, though the trade did fluctuate.
But T. Brake, the author we're focusing on, he argues differently.
He does. He argues convincingly that this silence likely reflects an actual reduction in the problem itself.
Why?
Well, think about it. If sea coal was so bad in the late 13th century that it led to royal decrees and smiths changing their work habits, why would people just stop complaining for 200 years if the problem was still just as bad?
Good point. It doesn't quite add up.
It suggests something shifted, temporarily easing London's air pollution.
And it wasn't a new invention, some kind of medieval catalytic converter.
Definitely not. We know that much. The answer, as we'll get into, seems to be rooted deep in the land itself, in these fundamental shifts in population and resources.
Okay, so we've got the problem, the early complaints, and this intriguing lull. But to really understand why sea coal became an issue in the first place and why it came back later, we need to dig into the bedrock, the economics and demographics of pre-industrial England.
Right. This is where the story of the fuel crisis really unfolds.
And first, let's tackle a common modern assumption. That maybe they switched to sea coal because it was, technologically necessary, better heat, met some new industrial need.
Yeah, T. Brake makes it very clear that this was absolutely not the case.
So the early users, lime burners, smiths, brewers, brick makers, salt makers, dyers, they'd always use wood or charcoal.
For centuries, the switch wasn't driven by needing more energy or some new technological breakthrough. In fact, sea coal was often actively bad for what they were doing.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, ironsmiths. They overwhelmingly preferred charcoal. Why? Because the high sulfur in sea coal made the finished iron brittle, weak, basically ruined it for many purposes.
Okay, what about brewers?
Brewers who tried using sea coal found the acrid smoke actually tainted the taste of their beer and ale, led to widespread public complaints. People didn't like sulfur-flavored beer, apparently.
Shocking. So it wasn't a better product, it was a compromise.
A major compromise. Even the early attempts later on, like in the 17th century, to tar sea coal, basically, trying to make coke by burning off impurities for smelting, they were largely unsuccessful until the 18th century. It just wasn't suited for those refined processes yet.
And what about just heating homes? Surely it was okay for that.
And not ideal there either, even though they had better fireplaces, flues, chimneys by the 12th and 13th centuries, much better than the old open hearths.
Sea coal still caused problems.
Think about it. Even burning damp or uncured firewood could fill rooms with smoke in those systems. Burning sulfurous sea coal. It would have made homes incredibly uncomfortable, unhealthy.
We have evidence of this preference.
Yeah, Samuel Pepys, the 17th century diarist. Even with these newer heating systems, he specifically kept a supply of charcoal for heating his dining room and bedroom. He preferred it over sea coal.
So that really underlines it. Its adoption wasn't about quality or efficiency or comfort.
Absolutely not.
So if it was bad for industry, tainted the beer, and made homes unpleasant, why on earth did Londoners keep turning to it? What was the driving force?
Pure economics. Simple as that. It echoes Adam Smith, writing much later in 1776.
In The Wealth of Nations.
Right. He observed that coals are a less agreeable fuel than wood. They're said to be less wholesome.
So his conclusion was?
Therefore, the expense of coals at the place where they are consumed must generally be somewhat less than that of wood.
Basically, you only choose the inferior, less pleasant option if it's significantly cheaper.
Exactly. That economic principle applies perfectly here. People didn't choose sea coal for its benefits. They chose it because they had to, because wood was becoming unaffordable.
Okay, so we're talking a genuine, widespread shortage of traditional wood fuels and prices shooting up.
Pushing Londoners towards the cheaper, dirtier sea coal.
To really get this, we need to understand just how central land use, especially woodlands, was back then.
Absolutely crucial. In that era, land, or rather the use of land for agricultural purposes, was the basis of economic life. It wasn't just farming land.
Woodlands and wastelands were key.
Hugely key. They were a constant source of timber for building, wood for fuel, even supplemental food like pannage for swine.
Which is letting pigs feed on acorns in the forest.
Right. A surprisingly important and cheap part of the medieval diet. Plus, woodlands provided materials for tools, homes, and vital stuff like shipbuilding.
So wood was just foundational.
The absolute backbone of almost everything. Think about charcoal burners, they were essential, leveling huge stretches of timber to make charcoal for critical industries like iron smelting and glass making.
So people must have realized how important forests were.
Oh, they did. Medieval society developed this elaborate system of rights and usages, complex customs, legal rights governing access to common lands and forests.
And actual laws.
Yes, laws like the Forest Charter. Some argue it was as important as Magna Carta, specifically designed to protect woodlands from destruction. They knew these forests were the very life of the medieval economy.
Losing them wasn't just an ecological issue, it was an existential threat.
Exactly.
So what changed? What put such pressure on these vital woodlands?
The Great Age of Reclamation, basically the 11th through 13th centuries, the key driver, sustained almost explosive population growth.
More people needed more land.
More land, more food. As families grew, their plots got subdivided generation after generation, often becoming too small to feed everyone. Survival became the priority.
So people started clearing new land.
Yes, a new breed of pioneers, often driven by sheer desperation, pushed into the wastelands, forests, marshes, fens. They were literally carving out new farmland. Asserting, it was called.
With axes and fire.
Axes, fire, spades, transforming the ancient landscape on a scale that's hard for us to grasp today. Sometimes whole communities, even monasteries, were involved in systematically turning wilderness into fields.
So it wasn't just farming expansion, it was fundamentally reshaping England.
Pushing human settlement and exploitation into previously untouched nature.
And at the same time, cities were growing too.
Right. Places like Paris and London were booming. More city dwellers meant vastly increased demand for food.
Driving up prices.
Exactly, which created the snowballing process. More people, higher food prices, more land cleared from forests and marshes to meet the demand.
And this just kept going.
It continued almost nonstop until the early 14th century. By then, frankly, few lands remained to be cleared. The landscape had been dramatically altered, forests shrunk, marshes drained. You see it in place names all over Europe from that era, references to woods and clearings where there's no forest now.
Let's look at England specifically. The numbers are pretty stark, aren't they?
They really are. England's population goes from maybe 1.1 million around the Domesday Book in 1086 to about 3.7 million by the early 14th century, more than tripled.
And London's grave.
London alone went from roughly 20,000 people in 1200 to at least 40,000, maybe more, by 1340. Doubled in size, putting immense pressure on local resources.
Especially wood.
Especially wood. The surrounding countryside, once heavily forested, just couldn't keep up with the demand for building timber and fuel.
There's that phrase, the gray enemy of the wood.
Yeah, an Anglo-Saxon poet describing the plowman. It perfectly captures that relentless expansion of farmland. The drive for food was so intense that even soil of vastly inferior quality was cultivated.
Lands you'd only farm if you were desperate.
Exactly. Lands a society only uses in times of real land hunger. It shows how stretched things were.
What about the royal forests? Couldn't they provide fuel?
Not really a viable solution. Despite being huge, they were mainly game preserves for the king and nobles.
For hunting?
Right. And the penalties for trespassing or taking timber were incredibly severe. We're talking fines, mutilation, even death. They weren't managed for public fuel supply.
So, by the mid-13th century, the shortages were becoming acute. We have evidence.
Clear, undeniable evidence. In 1232, King Henry III himself couldn't find the timber he needed for a major building project at Westminster, not even in the huge royal forests of Windsor or Cornbury.
If the king can't find wood.
That's a massive red flag. Then, 1255, this alarming report from the Forest of Dean, a big industrial area. The forges were using so much fuel that the report said the destruction of the forest exceeds the issues of the forges.
Meaning the wood cost more than the iron produced.
Essentially, yes. It was becoming uneconomical because fuel was so scarce and expensive. The king, or his advisors, clearly knew what was happening. He canceled a timber sale around then because, as he put it, in process of time, one trunk will fetch as much as 3 or 4 now.
He saw prices skyrocketing.
He did, and this scarcity led to desperate acts. In the 1260s, this guy, Peter de Neville, illegally chopped down and sold 7,000 oaks from a royal park. Huge-scale theft.
Wow. And the official response?
It culminated in King Edward I taking quite drastic action in 1290. He ordered an immediate halt to all exports of timber, brushwood, and charcoal through the Cinque Ports.
The key ports on the English Channel.
Right. His reasoning was stark. He feared inestimable damage when they need such things for England's own use. It shows a national awareness of looming depletion.
So all of this, the population boom, the land clearing, the timber shortages, the rising prices, it all leads back to sea coal in London.
Inevitably. Wood and charcoal just became too expensive, largely because of transport costs.
Overland transport was that bad.
Notoriously difficult, slow, expensive. Our source notes that just hauling timber 15-25 miles overland in the Forest of Dean could double or even quadruple its retail price.
Imagine adding that to your daily fuel bill.
Exactly, but here's the key. Sea coal from up in Newcastle.
Could be shipped down the coast easily.
Easily and much, much more cheaply by collier ship. Water transport was far more efficient.
So let's sum up this part. The first wave of air pollution in London, late 13th, early 14th century,
was a direct result of running out of affordable wood locally. Rising prices forced Londoners out of economic necessity to use the cheaper, dirtier sea coal.
Not a choice for better tech or comfort.
Nope. A choice for economic survival as traditional resources dwindled. The environment started paying the price for population growth and overexploitation.
Okay, this is where the story takes a really dramatic and frankly quite grim turn. This leads us into the next phase, nature's harsh correction and woodland's return.
Right. After that intense period of expansion and population growth, things started to change. By the last quarter of the 13th century, clearing new land peaked in Western Europe.
And then?
Then, in the early 14th century, agricultural land actually started to decrease in the most densely populated areas, like England. The land just couldn't sustain the pressure anymore.
This wasn't deliberate conservation, though.
Not at all. The first areas to be abandoned were marginal lands, the poor quality soils, the hillsides, the bogs they desperately brought into cultivation.
Net exhausted quickly.
Very quickly. Inferior nutrients, prone to erosion. Plus, with less common land for grazing, there were fewer animals, which meant less manure for fertilizer.
A downward spiral.
Yeah, T-Break notes some of these lighter, marginal soils were so badly eroded they're still infertile today, over 700 years later. And you see it in the yields, too. Average yield per amount of seeds sown generally declined across Western Europe between 1230 and 1350.
So putting in the same effort, getting less back.
Exactly. Clearing new land, asserting, had hit the point of diminishing returns. The resource base, the soil, was depleted.
And all this while the population was still high.
Right, which led to extreme fragmentation of farmland. Plots got divided and subdivided until they were tiny.
Like that example from Taunton.
Yeah. On the manor of Taunton in Somerset, the average acreage per person dropped from 3.3 in 1248 to 2.5 acres or less by 1311.
Which wasn't enough to live on.
Probably not sustainably. If it took about 3 good acres to support one person, then areas like Taunton were severely overpopulated. The margin against starvation became incredibly thin, most fragile, as the source puts it.
A terrifying situation.
Right.
One bad harvest away from disaster.
And disaster struck. The Great Famine, 1315 to 1317, triggered by unusually wet springs and summers, catastrophic harvest failures across Western Europe.
Seeds rotting, crops spoiling.
Exactly. Food stores were totally inadequate. Prices went through the roof, wheat apparently jumping from 5 shillings a quarter to 40 shillings in just 2 years.
As a result.
Widespread starvation, disease. It went on for 3 terrible years. Malnutrition was rampant, population growth stopped dead. The medieval boom period ended abruptly, brutally. A Malthusian check.
And then, just as things were maybe stabilizing, the real catastrophe.
The Black Death. 1348 to 1351, it turned stagnation into total collapse.
The death toll is just staggering.
Estimates are roughly 1 in every 4 people in Europe died in that first wave, maybe higher in dense cities like London. It's almost impossible to truly comprehend that scale of loss.
Entire villages wiped out.
Yeah, and it wasn't just one hit. Repeated outbreaks, 1360, 1369, 1374, kept pushing the population down.
So England's population, which peaked around 3.7 million,
Plummeted. It hit a low of just 2.1 million sometime between 1400 and 1430, less than 60% of its pre-plague level.
then London.
London suffered hugely. Population fell from maybe 60,000 down to around 35,000 by 1377.
This catastrophic population drop must have had huge environmental consequences.
Profound, if completely unintended. With so many people gone, farmland was abandoned everywhere, especially those marginal lands.
The core quality ones went first.
Predictably, fields, farms, whole villages just emptied out, fell silent, and nature started reclaiming them. Critically, a lot of this abandoned land was allowed to grow up in brushwood and eventually timber.
Fewer people meant less demand for wood.
Dramatically less demand for building materials, and crucially, for fuel. This gave England's hammered woodlands a vital chance to regenerate. Nature, in its own harsh way, was rebalancing things.
Is there actual evidence for this woodland recovery?
Indirect, but pretty compelling evidence, yeah. Remember King Edward I banning timber exports through the Cinque Ports in 1290 because of shortages?
Yes.
Well, by 1357, just over 60 years later, exports had resumed through Winchelsea, one of those ports, and there were even reports of merchants hiding smuggled goods under firewood shipments.
Showing firewood was plentiful enough to be used as packing material.
Exactly. And in the Forest of Dean, where there was wholesale destruction back in 1270, by 1369, a report says 200 acres of underwood, the stuff used for firewood and charcoal, were worth nothing a year for want of buyers.
A complete reversal from the earlier desperate shortages.
Absolutely. The economic value of wood had crashed because supply now exceeded demand.
Okay, bring this back to the air pollution. How does this woodland recovery explain the missing smoke?
This is the crucial link T-Break makes. That mysterious lapse in complaints concerning air pollution in London from the late 14th to mid-16th century. It corresponded perfectly with this period when England's woodlands recovered enough to supply most of London's fuel needs again.
So the air literally cleared up.
It seems so. Not because of human ingenuity or environmental policy, but because a massive, tragic demographic collapse eased the pressure on resources, allowing forests to regrow and provide clean fuel again.
Wow. It's a stark, maybe uncomfortable link between human population levels and environmental carrying capacity.
Very stark.
So the clean air wasn't progress. It was a side effect of catastrophe. But this balance, nature's correction, it wasn't going to last forever, was it?
No, human populations are resilient. As they recovered, so did the pressure on the environment. Which brings us to the second wave in permanent reliance.
Right. After that low point in the early 15th century, England's population starts to creep back up.
Slowly at first, from about 2.1 million in the early 1400s to maybe 2.3 million by 1525, then nearly 2.8 million by the mid-16th century.
And then it took off.
Then a sharp increase. By 1600, it's over 3.7 million again, back to and then surpassing pre-plague levels.
And this population rebound meant
Inevitably, increased demands for wood products and new woodland clearances. Déjà vu. It led directly to a second period of fuel and timber shortages by the second half of the 16th century.
mirroring the first crisis that brought in sea coal centuries before.
Exactly, the cycle repeats. But this time, the outcome would be permanent.
And we have evidence for this second crisis, too.
Just as stark, maybe even more so. There's a draft act of Parliament from around 1595 about prohibiting coal export. And it states clearly, by reason of the great scarcity, dearth, and decay of woods, the use of coals is of late years greatly augmented.
They're explicitly linking coal use to wood scarcity.
Absolutely. And Parliament wasn't just talking, they were passing actual laws, like one for the bringing in clapboard from the parts beyond the seas.
Importing basic wood siding.
Yes. And another law restraining of transporting of wine casks, which were made of valuable oak, all explicitly for the sparing and preserving of timber within the realm.
They were trying to hoard the remaining timber. It shows a real national concern.
It reached the very highest levels. By 1662, the commissioners of the Royal Navy were deeply worried. They saw the miserable condition of England's woods as a direct threat to the Navy's future. Shipbuilding needed huge amounts of timber.
So it was a national security issue.
Definitely. They formally asked the Royal Society for help finding a solution.
Which leads back to John Evelyn.
Right. His famous book, Silva, published in 1664, was a direct response to this crisis. It wasn't just about appreciating trees, it was a practical guide, advocating for massive tree planting, even suggesting moving destructive industries overseas to save England's forests.
A national reforestation strategy, essentially.
Pretty much.
But reforestation takes time. What happened with fuel prices in the meantime? This is the economic tipping point, right?
This is the real kicker. Between 1540 and 1640, firewood prices went up by an incredible 780%.
780% compared to general inflation.
General inflation for most other goods over that same century was about 291%.
So wood prices vastly outstripped everything else, a clear sign of critical shortage.
Absolutely. And what about sea coal prices?
They corresponded closely to the general inflation of 291%. Meaning sea coal became significantly, dramatically, and permanently cheaper than wood.
So the choice for Londoners
Was unavoidable again. Pure economics. They had no real option but to turn back to the less expensive fuels, sea coal from Newcastle.
But this time, the shift stuck.
Why? Why permanent this time?
The sheer scale of population growth and burgeoning industry. The woodlands just couldn't recover against that relentless demand. Sea coal and the pollution it brought became embedded facts of life for Londoners.
Fueling London's rise as an industrial city.
Ironically, yes. By the reign of Charles I, London was becoming one of the world's leading industrial cities, powered in large part by its grim reliance on innumerable factories and workshops and tens of thousands of domestic hearths, all spewing out sea coal smoke.
So the cycle of scarcity, necessity, and environmental impact repeated. But this time, there was no going back.
No going back. It paved the way for the infamous pea super fogs later on and fundamentally changed the city's environment.
Okay, so this whole deep dive, London's ancient smog, the fuel crises, it leads us to a bigger message, doesn't it? Something beyond just pre-industrial London.
Absolutely. Tidbrake's core argument is really important for how we think about our environmental challenges today.
Which is?
That the crisis we face now is much more complex than is often admitted. And crucially, it's not solely a product of modern industrialization, something unique to the last couple of centuries.
It didn't just start with the steam engine.
No. He argues it's the result of centuries of struggle by Western man to achieve dominance over his natural world. There's no magic date when a pristine world suddenly got polluted. The roots go much, much deeper.
That implies a pretty different view of Western history, especially the Middle Ages.
It does. It challenges that common idea of the Middle Ages as just a low watermark, a sort of decline between classical times and the modern era.
Instead,
Tidbrake asks us to see the last 1,000 years, including the medieval period of intense land clearing and resource use, as one of the great turning points in Western man's rise to ecological dominance.
so our current situation isn't an aberration, it's a culmination.
That's the provocative idea. It's built on foundations laid long ago.
What kind of foundations? What medieval innovations are we talking about?
Not just technological ones, but conceptual shifts, too. During this period, new, powerful weapons were first added to Western man's arsenal in his struggle with nature.
Like what?
Well, the historian Lynn White Jr. pointed out that it was uniquely in the Latin West that things like manual labor and invention came to be seen as acts of piety, almost a moral duty to transform and improve nature.
Invention itself, basically.
Kind of, yeah. And Clarence Glacken noted that medieval people developed a growing awareness of his ability to alter and control nature, to create something new, and to destroy.
A sense of agency, of dominion over nature.
Exactly. Attitudes that were largely unknown to classical civilization, which often saw nature as more sacred or unchangeable. Tidbrake argues it's hard to imagine our modern tech and control over nature without these deep medieval underpinnings. They fundamentally changed how humanity saw its place in the environment.
So looking back at that early London pollution,
It was an unwanted side effect of man's alteration and exploitation of his natural environment, a direct consequence of meeting basic needs: food, fuel, shelter. Just like today, fundamentally.
the dynamic hasn't really changed.
The underlying tension between human demands and environmental capacity is the same.
Only scale and degree are different today.
Precisely. Modern humans have a much greater capacity for environmental manipulation and exploitation than medieval Londoners ever dreamed of. Our technologies can alter things on a planetary scale.
And consequently,
Consequently, the ecological disturbances he causes are also proportionately more severe. The patterns are ancient. It's our tools, our sheer numbers, and the global reach of our impact that have amplified the consequences.
Which brings us to the end of this deep dive. And there's a final, really provocative thought from T-Break that seems worth leaving people with.
Yeah, it's quite sobering. He says, perhaps it will be instructive for us to keep in mind that the one great environmental crisis caused by human abuse before our own was resolved by a population reduction of 40% during the 14th century.
Wow. Resolved by the Black Death and Famine. It's a chilling historical precedent, isn't it?
It really is. It makes you think. What does this ancient history of pollution and fuel crises really tell us about our current challenges? About the potential paths forward, or maybe even backward, as we navigate our complex relationship with the planet?
Something to definitely mull over.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We hope this journey into pre-industrial London has given you some profound new insights, maybe a fresh perspective on just how long these environmental challenges have been with us.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the knowledge you need to stay informed.